everyone, to the Zorich Podcast, Conversations with Leaders and Legends. I am Chris Zorich, and on today's show, we have a Zorich Podcast two-timer. There's only been one other one, that was Tony Rice, but he was the anniversary, the one-year anniversary episode, but there's a special one. He is a true Notre Dame legend, All-American NFL alum, recent winner of the Jesse Harper Award, which we will talk about. But the real reason why he's here is because my man just published his first book. First, as I say, many. It's about his experiences at Notre Dame. It is entitled, If These Walls Could Talk, Notre Dame Fighting Irish by Reggie Brooks. Sir, this is my first time talking to you after you are a published author. How does it feel?
It still feels surreal. I got a lot of flack from my brother Tony, my brother Renard, my sister Robin, and my sister Ricky, because I didn't tell them that.
Nice. So it's a big surprise.
Yeah, so family, siblings were not too keen on with me not telling them. They was like, dude, what the hell are you doing? And it still hasn't hit me. It's still like, I published the book. Okay, that's
nice.
I'm still trying to wrap my brain around that.
Well, and here's the thing. So, folks, I'll have a link in the description part of the podcast where you'll have a chance to get it on Amazon. But if you're listening right now, you can just jump on Amazon and purchase it. I think it's interesting because this is at least one of the first books that I've seen about Notre Dame that's really from a player's perspective in recent years. I know that there's another book out, but I think what's interesting with your book is that, and by the way, it's right over there, right there. It's really kind of talks about and the success that Notre Dame has had kind of since with Luke Holtz, since you were part of his recruiting classes, but then also because you had kind of a journey after your NFL career at Notre Dame where you spent close to 20 years. And so you've had a chance to kind of really see the ins and outs. And I think what a lot of people may not know was that you also had a show after the games are over. And was it first on the radio and then kind of like locally, or?
It was more it kind of evolved. We used to do it like it was official Notre Dame football post-game show.
Okay.
And we actually used to do it early on outside the stadium at Gate 3. And, you have random people coming up. So it was a little, it could get a little dicey, especially if Notre Dame's not doing well.
Right. Exactly. So I think that's what's so interesting is that Reggie has this kind of unique perspective, being a player there during some great times, a part of some great recruiting classes, and he talked about that, but also having a chance to kind of witness some coaching changes and some good and bad situations as well. And that's everything is in there in this book, and I think it's really fascinating. And for those older folks who are watching the podcast or listening to the podcast, you also talk about kind of some of the old timers too, Johnny Lujak, some of the greats at Notre Dame as well. So this book really spans kind of a very long period of time, but I'm excited to kind of talk to you about it because although there's not enough in there about me, but that's a whole different story. The idea
I have some issues with you from when we would practice, and I'm sure you know what those are. You were not the kindest person to me for many years.
That is amazing. And we even worked together. We were even coworkers. That's terrible. But what's interesting is that, this is from a perspective, former player, an employee of the university for almost 20 years. And now we'll also talk about later on your involvement now being the executive director for Holtz Heroes, a foundation that's based around Coach Holtz and his philosophy. So we have a lot to unpack. But first of all, I kind of wanted to just ask kind of why a book? What got you started? Have you been thinking about it for a while, or How did it start?
There was some thought of it, but it just never, like I said, during my time in Notre Dame and the things I do, there was just not a lot of time to really sit down and think about it. And so happened that the pandemic really gave me a lot of time to myself to think, and it was actually brought to me by Triumph Books, the publisher, about doing something like this. And they have a series. This is part of a series of If These Walls Could Talk, talking about the Boston Red Sox, the New York Yankees, Michigan Wolverines have one. So different, high level organizations, sports organizations have done these. And it was just a unique opportunity. Like I said, it's not something I hadn't thought about for some time, but it was just, this was like a culmination of things that happened between having the time to sit there and contemplate. And actually, I can always remember that first game back to Notre Dame, coming to Notre Dame when there was no fans, no tailgating, and it was just so surreal. And it was around that time that, we had connected, and I talked to the publisher, and they asked, like, who would they like for me? Who would I like to have someone that would, kind of ghostwrite for me, with me? And John Heiser was just, the automatic choice, just because of our relationship, him being around Notre Dame, and he's done it for several others, but also having worked with Heiss, because he worked for Notre Dame for 40 years. So he had a even longer stint with Notre Dame and that perspective. And, he really helped me kind of flesh out some of the thought process to how to put the book together in that perspective. So that's why it kind of culminated with more than just my experience, but it brought in my knowledge of what happened with former players, from, conversations with guys like a Rocky Blyer, Alan Page, Johnny Lujak, Paul Horning, and then even the recent guys, Dalen Hayes, and Brady and Ian Book. So I've had, it just really takes you through kind of the experience of the Notre Dame athlete, from kind of the inception of it, when Notre Dame was really, born through Notre Dame. Notre Dame football was born through the athletes and the impact that they've had.
Sure. And for those folks who might not know who John Heiser is, he was the former sports information director for Notre Dame for, as Reggie said, he wound up working for Roger Baldessari, who was there for like 5,000 years, and then kind of Heiss took over from him after Roger left. But it's so interesting that you mentioned Heiser, because he's written several books about the University of Notre Dame and football, and I was fortunate enough to write a foreword for one of his books, The Greatest Moments in Notre Dame History. And so he's the perfect person to work with, to have a chance to kind of put this book together. And selfishly, during COVID, we would jump on Zoom calls, me and a couple of our buddies, and you didn't mention it at that point either. So, like your family, I'm kind of upset that you didn't give us a heads up that you were working on something big.
Because I would, kind of talk about some different times of, my experiences, and it was just, I was kind of having a conversation with myself and kind of reflecting on things, and it just never dawned on me that, this is going to be a book. I don't know why. I mean, they said it was, and even after they had said, okay, we're going to release it on this date, it really never really just sunk in until they sent me copies of the book, and it was like, oh, you know what? This is a book. It's like with pages and a cover. It was like, it was just real. And it just never, I don't know why, it just never sunk in that this really happened. It was a fun, and then when I read it, it was like, wow. It was a fun read because, again, it just reflected back on a lot of great stories, great people. And, it really emphasized what was, to me, the most valuable aspect of Notre Dame and Notre Dame football were the relationships that, we were able to build with each other that still, hold us together to this day.
And of course, I found out as I was researching for another guest, this book popped up on Amazon, and I saw it. And I sent Reggie a text, and I was like, "Thanks for letting me know. Okay, it's going to be out. Thank you very much." So I had to give you a hard time for that. You had to give you some shit for that because
fair. That's fair.
You know, and we all care about you. Want to know what's going on, but what's fascinating again, and I'm excited about it because it really kind of gives you kind of like a behind the scenes look at kind of really what Notre Dame football is and was and is going to be in the future because of your perspective. And it's been so unique that I don't think folks who may have books out there now or in the past really kind of have your perspective of being an administrator, being a former player. That in itself are two unique things. Guys may have played or they may have worked there, but none of them may have done both, which you have. And so that's really a different perspective. And let's kind of start it off by Jerome Bettis wrote the forward for it. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Jerome?
Well, and it's kind of cool because, again, when Jerome was a year behind me, and they probably had one. I mean, between your class and Jerome's class, those are two probably the most talented classes to ever come through Notre Dame. And I remember, like I said, Jerome's recruiting visit, and we were, that's when you could actually take recruits off campus, and they stopped doing that later on. But got into a fight. He was from Detroit, and was his dad was a postal worker just like my dad, and we just had an instant connection, kind of a brotherhood that lasted even to this day. It was great. Just recently he was back for the USC weekend with his son and his wife and daughter, and I'm looking at him and I was like, wow. And it's still JB, it's still my boy. And I just remember telling him, said, man, I'm just going to go up to Detroit just to see your mom, because I remember how his parents and my parents usually sit near each other. So we've always had this brotherhood of family and that connection of the importance of family. And I remember his brother, was always around and just really good people. And when you remember in the summertime, we'd leave Notre Dame and go either Chicago, Indy, and every now and then we shoot down to Detroit in the summertime. So we went by, we'd go to Jerome's or Rodney's house, and it was like that commonality that you just possessed. And he was always someone that I looked up to because he may have been younger, but this cat had asthma and would go out and just wreck shop. And that always impressed me, that just his tenacity, his energy that he would always have. And that's whether it was practice or in a game, you knew that brother came to play. And that's something that's always stuck with me and energized me. We never really competed against each other in the backfield. We competed with each other. So, I'd have a big run and he'd come back and do something, have a big run. We made each other better. And, it was just always something that just resonated, that, never felt any form of jealousy or, like, hey, you're taking carries from me. Anytime he did something or anytime I did something, we genuinely wanted the best for each other. And that's still to this day, something that just bonds us together.
Well, and for him to write the forward, again, he shares kind of a moment that you guys have, but more importantly, kind of talks about kind of his journey with Notre Dame as well. So, I mean, when Triumph contacted you, so you have Jerome for the forward, you wound up getting Heiss for the introduction, which again, I thought was a great introduction because he really talked about the expertise that you have, again, being an administrator, somebody that now has to make decisions and being that athlete. So let's back up a little bit. I mean, when you were now an administrator, I mean, how did you being a former athlete kind of play into kind of your perspective and the programs that you oversaw at Notre Dame?
It was very impactful, just in the kind of understanding, because a lot of times you got to wade through some BS. This generation is a little different, but it also, you got to learn the difference between if somebody's, the old saying, are you injured? Or are you hurt?
Sure.
If you just hurt, you can work through it and keep moving. But if you're injured, hey, that's a little more serious, and it takes a little more engagement or involvement. And that was one thing I tried to be very mindful of as an administrator, not to get overly involved in any. I don't coach. I didn't coach. I let the coaches manage that. And I always go back to the old saying, owners own, players play, and coaches coach.
Sure.
Find your role and work within that role, but also have a nuanced approach to, how things are done. And then, in hiring and engaging with the coaches to make sure that the athlete's perspective is heard, first of all, but also encouraging them to, kind of think through, the situations that the, young men and women can find themselves in. So I leaned on my experience of, I didn't say anything. You didn't want to talk to the coach. You didn't want to. If you had to go see Coach Holtz, it was probably nothing good.
Right.
So, and it's different now. Like I said, athletes want to have a relationship and how to build that relationship, but also understanding that that is the coach. There's a hierarchy that you have to work through, which and be respectful of that, and try to have. I didn't want to be a coach's coach or athletes or coach's administrator or athletes administrator. I wanted to be more of kind of well-rounded to understand that perspective to say, okay, hey, if the athlete comes to me, kind of, having an issue with a coach, talking through it to say, exactly where was the issues, what was that issue, and then being able to talk it out with them to give them some perspective of, the coach's perspective. And then, hey, is this something that needs to be elevated and to a higher level? I mean, we had a couple of instances dealing with some of our coaches and athletes that it required to be escalated in certain cases,
Sure.
but tried to keep an even hand where, as long as the organization and the program was moving in the right direction, and the athletes felt that they had a voice, and the coaches felt that they had the authority to manage a team as best they saw fit. It really, that was kind of what led me in terms of my administrative style.
Okay. And in the book, it's kind of interesting because you talk about kind of your journey to Notre Dame, but it's not the first chapter. The first chapter really started off with the 2020 season. Can you kind of talk about why you decided to go that route as opposed to kind of talk about, well, back when I was a sophomore in high school, and then kind of move on from there?
I'd start at that because that was probably the most fresh experience in my mind at the time, because it was during the pandemic, and a lot of the things, a lot took place in the course of 2020 that was impactful, not only for the athletes, but for the university. And this, Notre Dame is very much it's not so much separate. I mean, there's a distinction between athletics and the university side, but there's a lot more commonality and crossover that takes place, that things that impact the university has a major impact on athletics and vice versa. So a lot of the things that were happening that year, I mean, I was blown away. I was still trying to process. I mean, these kids played in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, and I knew how, I can remember and relate to how tough it was just to get up in the morning, go to class, then go to practice, go study, and then you heap on a whole, health crisis, and then all the stuff that went on with the social unrest, and you're still trying to prepare for a season. And, just the mental fortitude that takes just to step out, and especially with all the struggles. I've never been through a pandemic, so I had no reference point to, even give the athletes a understanding of like what this is. Because I mean, if it was, you have some, school, we have a couple of folks that have, we had a couple of pickets or protest, in this, that's one thing, I can give you some how to go through a protest, but a pandemic, a little different. And so, and it just, I wanted to emphasize the importance of the tie between the university and the athletic department,
Okay.
in particular the university and the football team, because Notre Dame is still, and I know the university tries to say we're an academic institution, which we are, but a lot of people know Notre Dame through the football team, and that lens is a powerful lens, and it can provide a lot of perspective in terms of what's important, the values that are set, and how these young men were able to, present themselves and live up to those values while going through a very trying time.
Sure. And that's what I think is so kind of fascinating about the book is that, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that folks don't know about what happened during that year. I mean, one of the things that I know that there were, I mean, they would have position meetings via Zoom. I mean, how does that happen? Like, how do you not fall asleep, during those meetings when the coach is talking, but, you necessarily can't. Can you kind of share a couple of things that you were able to witness?
I know just in the thing that really stood out to me was just they could only have 10 people working out together at one time.
Wow.
And you're talking about 100 guys.
Wow.
You had to make room and timing to get 100 guys to do their workouts and maintain some level of social distancing, and the testing was just crazy. Just the amount of testing daily. I mean, and really, football was kind of set the tone for in a lot of the university and how the university,
sure.
like I said, the protocols that were implemented. The football program, they were kind of like the guinea pig for the most part, because they came in before the students, and so they had to create all these weight room protocols, meeting rooms. I mean, you could only have so many guys in the meeting room, and not everybody could meet together. And again, if somebody, like you said, they had to have those, just before they even came back to campus, they were doing the Zoom meetings, and just there was no spring ball.
Right.
So everything they had to really pack everything in the fall ball right before the season. And a lot of it was not together. And you know better than anybody the importance of being able to actually physically be present with your teammates, not just the guys that, if you're, say your offense, the offensive line, not just the other four offensive linemen with you, but the backups,
Right.
So you're hearing the same things. And if you're not playing together because you can't be in the same room, I mean, think about that. That's just, special teams. And, to me, football is the consummate team sport. And a lot of that is being together. They couldn't be, there was only 10 people could be in the locker room at one time. I know it was, I think about 20 at the most.
But still,
it had to be one group. So they had to, measure out who could be in the locker room at what time, who could be in the meeting room at one time. The coaches couldn't, the offensive, defensive coaches had to, manage their meetings. And so they had multiple meetings because they had to meet with other coaches. They had to meet with individual players or groups of players separately, and some are on Zoom. And the kicker was, to me, and I found this out later, the recruiting, because they still have to recruit. So everything, there's Zoom. I mean, you talking about being zoomed out. I mean, and I think, technology is great, and it provides a really, nice tool to be able to engage individuals. But at some point in time, it's like, I just want to see someone's face,
I could imagine,
face to face, and not this screen. And that was a constant throughout the year, because they wanted to maintain. And then they had class. I mean, because Notre Dame was one of the first institutions, if not the first, to go in person.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very much, frowned upon in a lot of respects.
Right.
And they had, and again, athletes, you had the dorm dynamic, classroom dynamic. And I had the good fortune of being a Moreau instructor. And and we had a couple of players in my class, and these were freshmen, so they came in with, no playbook in how to manage their time, how to manage,
Jeez.
what they were doing, let alone, okay, well, I got to get to workouts, but I also have to get to class, and if I'm in the dorm, who's my dorm mate,
Right.
and it was just, and this was a constant for the entire year.
And somehow, they had an incredible year. They had a chance to beat Clemson at home. What was that feeling like?
And that was the other thing, because we were doing similar on StreamYard, we had the Rally House, and I was kind of overseeing that, getting former players back and connected, which was, phenomenal. That was the first time it was just really hit me that you had some synergies between generations, our eras.
Okay.
It was a guy, Mike Whittington, who was.
Well, hold on, Rich. Can you explain what the Rally House was? Because that's something that kind of, I guess, was born from the kind of this COVID Zoom situation.
It was, and it was a system by which to engage fans with some of the Notre Dame greats, but also allow some of the Notre Dame greats to engage with each other. They had these little rooms that we would be in, and we had to, we come out on stage. And we use StreamYard for the as the platform, and we'd have like about 10 guys behind the scenes, and they could, kind of communicate with each other while the game is going on. And we would bring in guys from different eras every quarter. Have a different set of guys that come on and talk about the game while the game is going on.
Wow.
I really enjoyed it because it was, you got to see some perspectives. Like Bob Golick was freaking hilarious. It's just some of the conversations that took place between, and then we kind of mix some of the generations.
Sure,
so we get some of the younger guys and older guys, and see a lot of the, I distinctly remember Darius Walker. His dad played USFL football, and he actually was a teammate of Mike Whittington.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't know each other, but they start talking to each other and made some connections there, had I remember Tom Gatewood and Malcolm Johnson.
Okay.
Just had these we had, Sam Young, an offensive, I can't remember the offensive lineman that, George Gedeke. And so you have these different eras,
sure,
but some similar stories and that commonality between that brotherhood of being a former Notre Dame football player. It was pretty cool.
And it's interesting because when you talk about kind of what you have to do as a necessity as an administrator to kind of keep those fans engaged, this is something that, I don't think any other school in the country had it. It was the chance for fans to kind of hang out and kind of do game watches with former players.
Yeah, we actually would bring them in, and we'd have like a fan every quarter would come in and just on stage and would talk through the game, and talk to some of the like Rocky Blyers and different guys from different eras, and get to talk to them and kind of pick their brain. And this is as the game is going on that and the funniest part was, like I said, you gotta love technology. Everyone was watching it on TV, but some folks is streaming or whether it's cable or whatever,
right,
was further along than everybody else. So not everybody else is on the same page.
Sure.
Had guys talking about a game or a play, and somebody was like 3 plays behind.
Oh my God!
What happened?
Wow. But again, it just talks about kind of the idea of that Notre Dame had, kind of understanding that, hey, during this process, we're going to have to engage our fan. How can we engage our fan? How can we keep them engaged? Because right now they only allowed students and administrators into the stadium
and staff and some staff.
Okay, and some staff. So now, how do you keep, tens of thousands of people that had season tickets I mean, how do you keep them engaged? And I think Notre Dame they were really on the forefront of having a chance to kind of let folks kind of see what's going on, maybe as a practice goes on, or even have a chance to kind of watch it with former players. We're going to take a short break here, and then when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Reggie's journey to Notre Dame and kind of his experience after almost 20 years.
That is just getting you to know. That's really getting you, isn't it?
Wow.
We run the clock. Super 16 is the cream of the crop. College football time of year don't stop.
You're adding this guy.
Just another go dome with the courage, heart, skill, and will. Bringing you the best 16. Serving up a plate for the football fiends. Breaking the best 16 college teams. Football fans, it's the show of your dreams.
Ain't no bias. Chris Zorich breaking truth. Traded in the golden helmet in the past for a suit. With the tape, never lies. College ball, he's a stoop. Breaking the top 16, not the top 32.
I don't mean to cut you off like a Zorich jersey, but you ain't really grinding unless the jersey dirty. Hit the running back like a Mack truck behind the 30-yard line. It's game time. My team ride you off the sideline.
You look at Chris like this with a fact checklist, going over college teams like a 50 scientist. Steve streaking from his head like in his playing days. Super 16 polls on his show straight away.
It's the FBS, the best of the best from the ACC to the SEC. Pac-12, Big Ten, Mountain West, Sun Belt, and the Big 12. Open your eyelids, who the best like the clock? Super 16 is the cream of the crop. College football time of year don't stop. With Christopher Zorich, just another go dome with the courage, heart, skill, and will. Bringing you the best 16. Serving up a plate for the football fiends. Breaking the best 16 college teams. Football fans, it's the show of your dreams.
So you can catch the Super 16 poll show with me and my producer, Philatosian, on Monday evenings at 7 p.m. Central and 8 p.m. Eastern Time, which is, I am fortunate enough to have a ballot, a say, so to speak, in the Super 16 poll, which is a combination of the National Football Writers Association and the National Football Foundation that has a chance to put that together. So that's really exciting. But again, we are here to talk to our guest, Reggie Brooks, about his new book, Inside If These Walls Could Talk, kind of the inside story about Notre Dame. So talked before about kind of your journey to Notre Dame. You were on before, you kind of talked about it, but can you kind of give us a little condensed version, and please include the fact that you came to the school without a coat? I think that's really, really interesting.
Well, at least I didn't have the half jersey,
Wow.
which I'm a fan of bringing that back. I really am. I'm like, is there an NCAA rule against that now? Wow. I don't know why that went away.
Wow.
Dude, that just brings back some serious memories. Like that's when we were grimy back then.
Yes, we were. We were dirty. We were nasty.
Yes. I mean, I love that.
Wow.
Well, she said to come to Notre Dame, coming from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I don't know why it just never registered, because we never came. I guess because we never came to a game when you guys were here.
Okay.
I never came to a game after October.
Probably so smart. You were probably playing.
I didn't know about the cold. I mean, I knew it got cold here. I mean, cold in South Bend, but I never, like I said, you remember, like I said, the fall games, it was always pristine. The leaves are changing colors. The Golden Dome was gleaming and was just all good. And I'm thinking, okay, that's on par with how it's supposed to be all the time. So I, come on my recruiting visit, and I think that was my second to last visit.
Okay.
And I didn't have a coat. It wound up being in January. Dude, oh my God. I blame my brother.
True. Well, yeah.
I blame my brother. Why would you not tell me?
That's very true. And
why would you not tell me what I was coming into?
Mention the fact, I think you referenced before that, I think he only showed up like to say hi to you, and then you didn't see him the whole weekend or something like that.
He showed up to get his per diem.
That's right.
For the hosting per diem.
And then bounced.
I saw him on when the recruits first gathered with their host and the coaches, and they have the one meal. I didn't see him again until I was about to leave. That was the next time I saw. And, it was like a 2-day visit. And I was like, I'm literally on my own because, you had to go, and we had meetings with, academic personnel.
Right.
And your host is supposed to be taking you from place to place. Notre Dame is not big. I understand that. But I don't know where the hell I am. I'm just walking around campus because when I came for games, I just went to the stadium.
Sure.
Hotel, the stadium, and that was it. You walk around and look at like go down to the grotto or maybe go see the dome, but I've never gone into an administrative office or a classroom or anything, which that's what you did when you were on your recruiting visit. And my host was nowhere to be seen. So I'm literally trying to roam around and find where I'm supposed to be. And if it was not for a grounds crew person, again, this individual had no connection to me whatsoever, and he was able to help me get to my meeting on time.
Wow.
And that just always stuck with me. It's like, because if it was up to my brother, I would have just been screwed. And again, they take that stuff seriously. You don't show up to a meeting.
Right, exactly.
You might not get in.
Right.
So that was one thing that just like, first I was freezing my butt off. And secondly, I don't know where the hell I'm supposed to be. And I'm supposed to be with the admissions folks, and I don't know where I'm supposed to go.
And you actually talk about this in the book. Again, I don't want to give too much away, but you and your brother, y'all are in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the heart of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. And at that point, both of the schools were on probation. Is that correct?
Yeah. And it did not stop them from, inquiring about how can we make you stay here in
what
state.
It would take, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
so it's like,
crazy.
what would be a good incentive to keep you here? That was they still didn't have a problem doing that.
Well, it's kind of interesting. And you had an amazing journey as a player, but I don't think a lot of folks know. You weren't one of Holtz's favorite guys yet. And there was a situation where he kind of changed, he changed your position, and you actually played both positions for a little bit and then wound up becoming the running back like later in your career. Can you kind of talk about that?
Well, that was a real tough time for me. I actually came close to leaving and transferring because of, that transition or, that initial transition to defensive back. I came here as an athlete, and many of us did. You changed positions too, went from linebacker to D-line.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, it was a lot of it because we didn't recruit. There was no defensive backs recruited my year. We didn't get anybody. And, we lost, Dewan, Pat, not Pat, but Dewan and Corny Southall.
Mm-hmm.
We lost about 4 or 5 defensive backs, George Streeter, from the year before. And, it was kind of thin in that area. So the coach was like, I need you to go to the other side of the ball and, give us some depth. And at the time, I was cool with it because it's just an opportunity to play.
Right.
But the kicker was when George, Coach Heater would not, he weighed me and said, hey, you cannot weigh more than 185.
Really? I didn't know that.
And I came into Notre Dame at 180 and had 6% body fat. So and after freshman year, I'd gained like, 5-10 pounds.
Sure.
And so I'm trying to get that. And it was 5-10 pounds a month. Smitty, he'd
God,
have us right.
Yeah.
So I'm starving myself, man. I'm like, this sucks. God. And I would get weighed every day before practice. And oh man, and like I said, if I didn't get weighed, I had to run. And so that was just I mean, that was one of those times where it's like, man, I don't know if this is worth it.
Well, you were able to, again, after the move to defensive back, you're able to play at running back. And you entitled Chapter 13, which I think is really interesting, 2 plays to remember. And for those folks who may not know, it's almost a play on words, the remember part. I think that was kind of funny. So let me play the first clip of the first play to remember.
Win as the clock
going in. Notre Dame has scored.
Michigan's always a tough game. I mean, it's going to be a hard-fought, physical matchup. I always gauge games based on that first hit. And that first hit I took in that game was a pretty good shot. So it was kind of, hey, this is going to be one of those lunch pail games, so be ready to grind it out.
Reggie Brooks moving into his own. He switched numbers. He was 41 a year ago, now 40, the same number worn by his brother Tony last year, and the same number worn by their dad Raymond at Booker T. Washington in Tulsa. Brooks made the play. Here's the option. Brooks on the pitch. Brooks through. Brooks.
I don't remember the play initially. I only remember what I saw on the film the next day.
So I'm sure you've seen that play just a couple too many times, but it wound up being this historic play. I mean, they eventually made that the play of the year. Am I correct? So, I mean, this through your suffrage, let's say, you were able to kind of be one of these great plays in Notre Dame history. And for that year, play of the year, can you kind of maybe kind of walk us through it, but also kind of how you aren't really defined by that play, but it was kind of very interesting to kind of have it happen.
That was the thing about it. Said, and I always said, that's not my favorite play because getting knocked out is not cool. There's nothing fun about that.
I mean, not at all.
Not at all. And for it to happen and then become an iconic play. And I always think of, like I said, if I were, 5 yards back, that's a fumble.
Right, exactly. You're right. Exactly.
And I'm possibly not playing the next game. And because Coach Holtz, he's not concerned about you getting knocked out.
Right.
You put the ball on the ground. That's the problem.
Right.
So that's the thing. I always reflect back on. It's like, man, it's a good thing I was where I was, because if I was 5 yards back, that would have been a fumble, ball turned over. I'm on the sideline, and no matter of smelling sauce or unconsciousness would not keep Coach Holtz from ripping my ass a new one, because I put the ball on the ground and turned the ball over. So that was always one of those things that just rotates in the back of your mind. It's like, it's okay to get knocked out, but don't drop the ball.
Right. And I think was amazing. You actually talked about it in the book too. I mean, was it just kind of? I mean, you've done it thousands of times. You carry the ball thousands of times. Like, you talk about how you don't remember switching hands. I mean, the ball went from one side to the other. I mean, do you even remember that part?
No, it was just, like I said, that I looked at that, I was like, wow, okay. That's definitely muscle memory.
I'm good.
So I'm watching the game the next day, and so after the game, you have the press comes in, and you have the press conferences, and then you talk to the press. They're asking me questions, and to be honest with you, I don't remember half that game. And I came back and finished playing, later on, to finish the game. But a lot of that game was like, I didn't see it until I was like, wow, okay, man, that was a good game.
Wow.
I'm in film practice on Sunday, like, I'm looking at the game like, it's like, wow, man, I'm seeing stuff and like, oh wow, okay. I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
And
So
it
it was
wound
great.
up being this iconic play that actually they actually had a painting of it in the Joyce Center, right?
I have it now. They gave it to me.
Oh, they did. Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
So I actually have that. I have that with me now, and again, as this transition, we're still transitioning here to South Bend. I mean,
Sure.
to here to Texas. So definitely will be proudly displayed on the wall somewhere in the house soon.
Well, here's another play of many that you're kind of known for, but this is the second play of chapter 13 when it talks about 2 plays to remember.
Right. Meyer. Yes! Brooks!
Now, that was the last game senior year, correct?
Right.
And can you kind of talk us a little bit about that one? Because that was, I mean, you didn't get knocked out in this one, and you wound up.
I like this play. I actually like this play because I remember it.
Well, why don't you tell us about it then?
So, well, the one bad thing about the play is like I was not supposed to be in the progression at all.
Oh,
so, literally, I'm trying to get out of the way.
talking about it went over my head or something, right?
Yeah, no, Irv was like, "Where's Rick throwing the ball?" He was being rushed.
Oh my
so
God.
it was like, and he looked over and like, and it was just this automatic like, oh wow, okay,
that's hilarious.
They threw it to Reggie. Ugh. And the thing that people don't know is that, I did not wear I wore contacts or glasses, and in the games I wore contacts, but in practice I didn't, and was not known for catching in practice, and and if you don't catch the ball in practice, they're not gonna look at you at the game.
Oh my
so,
God.
and I would imagine, like I said, and I'm sure if Rick, you asked Rick, his heart kind of skipped a beat because I was the only option. I was literally the only option.
Oh.
And literally people forgot about me because I was not in the progression of that play at all. So it was just like, oh, okay, well, if I have to throw it, I just have to and just hope and pray. That was the mindset.
Well, and then I think, from what I remember from the book, that play was actually like literally drawn up on the sideline from Coach Holtz.
Yeah, because we used the 2-point conversion that we normally practice every week. We used that for the 4th down touchdown pass to Jerome.
Okay.
And the one thing about the play that people kind of just overlook is that where was risk management back then? Did you see the fans? I mean, literally
right on top of you.
Literally, they collapsed. I was smothering. I was being smothered. I mean, I literally couldn't get up. If not for Irv, like getting people off of me and getting me out of there, I was getting trampled. And I'm like, man, that's kind of dangerous. I was like, we should think about risk management. So I think I led the charge for risk management for Notre Dame football, Notre Dame athletics, because literally, you look at it, even before the play, after the ball, I caught the ball, the fans are like right there.
Right.
I was like,
exactly.
You got to ask the kid, could the ref really see? He couldn't see down that line.
Wow, that is hilarious. Now, you kind of talk about how those 2 plays are in the book, yes. That they have their own chapter, yes. But, you also enjoyed when you played SC. Tell us about that.
Oh my gosh, playing SC, as you well know, you can attest to this too. Never lost to SC. Again, and we had the rivalry with Michigan State.
Sure.
I can't call Purdue a rivalry because they were not very good back then. But SC was the game. And I remember Coach would always, like I said, if you're going to go on the trip, as a freshman, you had to take the test of the history of the game and of the series.
Right.
And so this is senior year, last game of the year, and we're in the Coliseum. and we'd always stay an extra day, and it was great. That extra day was great, and again, the visuals out there were pretty nice, and my sister was out there, so I'm the day of the game we have pregame meal. I think somebody poisoned us. We got food poisoning because it was like 4 or 5 of us that were sick as a dog. Craig Hims was one of them, and I was throwing up. I didn't even do pregame warm up.
Really?
I did not do pregame warm up, and Coach Holtz was like, just came and asked me, "Are you going to be able to play?" And I'm like, I'm not missing this, Coach. I couldn't. I mean, I was just in a haze, but there's no way I'm letting this game. This is my last game against a bitter rival. I got to find some way to make this happen. And literally just this past week was at the USC game in South Bend, ran into Dr. Moriarty, and we were talking about this. I was given IVs before the game.
Oh my God, it was that bad.
It was bad. I couldn't keep anything down. I mean, water. I drank water. It was coming up. And they were just pumping me with IVs like potassium. And so I go out and literally have the game of my life.
Oh my!
I don't think I've ever played that well. I mean, everything was hitting, and it was a close game. So that to me, that was the best game I've ever had. Period.
Oh,
whether it was
awesome,
professionally, collegiate, high school, whatever it was, and to have it against SC.
Right.
I mean, that to me, that cemented my legacy of Notre Dame just because of the success we had and I had against USC. So that will always go down as my favorite game, play, or whatever you want to call it. Well, I can't say play because we had multiple
right.
plays. So
that's awesome.
But the thing that I did not like is that you remember after the game, you go out, hang out because you were there that extra night. So and the nightlife in LA is pretty good.
Were you just getting more IDs? Or what,
no, I went back to the hotel. And we'd stay in Anaheim, because Coach liked to keep you about 500 miles away from anything. And but most of the time we found a way. I was back. I was asleep. They had to come wake me up to get ready to get back because I was out. I was completely gone that whole night. I think it was like the next afternoon. They literally had to come wake me up to get me to get the bus and get back to South Bend.
Well, so I'm talking about South Bend, and we're gonna skip the pro career only because this book is about Notre Dame. In chapter 29, you talk about the ND networks, and really interesting story. I mean, folks may not realize that you didn't start at Notre Dame working in the athletic department. You started in another department. So talk a little bit about that kind of journey and why you were able to why you titled chapter 29 as the network chapter.
Because again, so I played 4 years in the NFL, and then I played in NFL Europe. And, and then when I didn't get picked up by anybody, it's like, hey, I need to start working. And this is the one thing, like I said, I'm animate about is that as a former athlete, we have to be better about engaging with the Notre Dame network.
Sure.
And earlier in our career, whether it's while you're at Notre Dame, get wherever your Notre Dame local club is, the Notre Dame club, and they're all over the country, all over the world.
Right.
Find some time to connect with those individuals because it's not just alumni, it's the Subway alumni and a lot of the clubs. So you can be a part of the Notre Dame club just by being a dues paying member of that club. You don't have to be an alum or anything. And there are just so many people that I've come across that, I connected with. And when I came back stateside, I went and played NFL Europe in Barcelona. I come back and, I'm back in Tulsa and I connect again with Bill Warren, who's a prominent alum, as well as the Siegfried family. And immediately get a job because of that connection with, in aerospace, and then my degree was in management information systems.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from working with the Siegfried family, and I did a lot of the change management. A lot of ERP systems were pretty big, and like transitioning their system to a more enterprise-wide system. And so that kind of helped put me in a position. And and this is something me and my wife talked about, where would we want to raise our kids? And this is, I'd say, this was about October or so, no, September of 2003.
Okay.
Christina's pregnant, and, I'm working, and I had submitted a application to Notre Dame in the Office of Information Technology because they were in the process of going through a enterprise system change.
Okay.
And, didn't think anything else about it. And then we were talking about it, and literally 2.5 weeks later, I'm getting a call from Notre Dame about coming to interview for the job.
Wow.
And it was just, fortuitous. And I come back and get the job, and it's immediately go from that to, hey, can you start doing the post-game show? Because of, because again, I wanted to kind of be low key, just work and mind my business. But it was a great opportunity to kind of reconnect with the football program in a sense. And next thing I know, this is pretty bad, but the current role I had with Notre Dame around with the outreach to former athletes was based off of how pissed off people were with Charlie Weiss and how he treated the alumni, the football alumni in particular. They literally took out a billboard cursing and talking.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. That.
So Kevin White basically created this role to do outreach originally to our former football athletes, and it morphed into, being an administrator, which I talked, one of the things I really appreciate Jack Swarbrick for making me do was being an administrator for at Notre Dame.
Sure.
And it's propelled me into, just having a real love for that role. And that was probably one of my favorite things about being at Notre Dame was being an administrator for the track and field cross country program.
Well, and one of those things, and this is recently, as I was doing my research, you actually were the recipient of the Jesse Harper Award right here. Can you share with us a little bit about what that award is about and really kind of what it means to you?
This is something that, because Jack Swarbrick is he's a big history buff and a big fan of Jesse Harper. Because everybody sees Jesse Harper, everybody thinks more of Newt Rockne than Jesse Harper. When Jesse Harper
and he was the first AD. Okay, he was the first AD. All right.
Yes. And and everyone talks about Newt Rockne and the forward pass. Well, Newt Rockne was actually, this was news to me, he was the receiver of that forward pass where Jesse Harper was the quarterback who threw the pass.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Exactly. And like I said, and Jesse Harper was more of a behind the scenes guy and, just, want to propel things forward and, coming up with new ideas and new perspectives, but not being out in the forefront. And the Jesse Harper Award is the highest award given to anyone that, from athletics, the University of Notre Dame Athletic Department.
Okay.
And I had no idea that was coming. I'm thinking I'm just going to come in and talk about the 75th anniversary of the Black student athlete, kind of talk about what I'm doing now and the role of Holtz's Heroes in terms of engaging former athletes and, the scholarships that we do for current, underprivileged youth. And I'm thinking, okay, boom, I go in and I'm out. And lo and behold, they pull out this little statuette, and it really hit me because I knew what the award was
Right.
because it was when it was implemented, which was recently, and to be the recipient of that, because that says, they value you at a very high level. So that meant so much, and it has a permanent, place on our mantle because of what it means. And it did, for me, signify the value of the work that I did with our former student athletes, and, the importance of, it's not about me, it's about we.
Which is, again, going back to the book, is so amazing because it's this different perspective that, again, only you have. I mean, when I start kind of thinking about people who could have written books like this, the only other person that comes to mind is George Kelly, right? I mean, because he coached there, and he coached there, and then was administrator there for a while, right? And so a lot of guys, and I'm talking about for a while, not just like, he coached there, and then all of a sudden he was in charge of, he was involved in development for a couple of years, and then he was gone. I mean, he actually put time in, like you did. Yeah. And so the idea that you have all these different perspectives, and for the university and the athletic department, Jack Swarbrick, to really kind of show their appreciation for what you really were able to make a difference in the athletic department for such a long time. I think that's terrific. But a couple more things I want to cover. One, you talked about in chapter 38, you talked about how 2012 was just this amazing year. Can you kind of tell us a little? And that was Notre Dame went undefeated to go on to play Alabama for the national championship. Can you kind of share a couple stories from your experience?
Well, like I said, the thing that jumps out to me are with the players, and again, it reminded me a lot of the '88 team from the respects of, they had, because I always felt that the '89 team was more talented, but from a togetherness standpoint, the camaraderie and how those guys meshed together was phenomenal. And to see that progression over the course of the season and how they rose to the occasion game in and game out. They had some close games, but they found a way to win. And then just the leadership on the team. I look at that defense, and guys that come to mind is Cameron Lewis-Moore on defensive line, Manti Te'o, who finished second in the Heisman. You look on the back end, Bennett Jackson. You had some guys that were leaders that set the tone, and also again some unheralded leaders. I look at in the backfield, you had Theo Riddick. Again, they had some really dynamic players, right. But Theo was not he made plays, but he was not someone that, that stuck out in terms of, that flash. He was just, consistent. And that was kind of what his pro career became. And, he was one of the guys I ran into back at campus. And it just, I look at, those guys and say, you look back at the '88 team, yourself, Boo Williams, you had Stoney, not like heralded names, but just really good players, Pat Terrell, DJ, and just the commonality. And like, you look at T. Rice and, Mark Green, and how those guys stuck together, the leadership that was on those teams,
right, and
the leadership at every level really stood out to me, and how they were able to perform all year when, I think that was that year. I mean, I don't think they were even expected to finish, in the top 10,
right?
Let alone, wind up being number one. And it was also strange how it played out, because you had literally two teams to lose at the very last game that propelled Notre Dame into that position. That just set the tone for that, just that common bond that you see between Notre Dame, those championship level teams. And, I always wondered, what could have been until I came out there. And the story that I want to tell here is, like I said, I didn't really put in the book, is the number of guys from the championship teams we were able to bring back to bring to that game. You had guys from the 66 national championship team, 73, 77, and 88.
Wow.
And, and you think about that, I mean, the heyday of Notre Dame, and to come back and see them supporting this group of young men. And I will say this, when I saw Bama come out of the locker room, it really was like, okay, this is not the same. This is a little different.
Well, and eventually
much bigger.
We had a chance to kind of at least start to get on the same level at that point. But now it's interesting. So, I mean, there's a ton of stories in here. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about one that didn't make it with bringing the guys back for the national championship game. But can you think of maybe a story that actually didn't make it into the book?
Well, there was a few stories that didn't make it in the book.
That you can tell on you can tell on a family-oriented show. Come on.
Exactly. I will say, just for me,
or at least one that you wanted to get in there, but they were like, forget it, stop, get out of it.
Some of the things that took place in the locker room, for me, it was like, I remember coming in as a freshman and how guys like Braxton Banks and Anthony Johnson, took me under their wing. Because I was saying, because my brother didn't get to play, and I didn't talk about this, but he didn't get to play my freshman year, so he was suspended. And how so many of the other guys, like Todd Light, Ricky Waters, T. Rice, you guys, embraced me at a time when there was a lot of uncertainty about, am I even going to stay here? Because again, I don't know if my brother's getting back in or none of that. And, just the locker room was so welcoming at a time when I needed it the most, that I talk about, kind of the locker room further in the book elsewhere, but that was, when it was like literally right before the season was going to start, he and Stoney were suspended.
Right.
And, that was one of the major reasons I came to Notre Dame, was because of my brother, and he's gone. So I'm looking, feeling isolated and alone. And, to have guys step up and be there for me, that was huge. That was huge. And I always want to thank yourself and so many other guys that took a little bit of time to treat a little knucklehead freshman like a brother.
Well, of course, man. That's a whole family aspect. I'm sorry that didn't have a chance to get in the book, man. It sounds like a really meaningful story for you. But so what about your favorite story from the book? And I mentioned before that you've talked about, I mean, look, it's not just during your era. I mean, you've talked about, as you mentioned before, you've talked about Lou Jack, you talked about Hart. I mean, all these kind of great names in Notre Dame lore. I mean, do you have a favorite story from your book besides the fact that you wrote it?
Just that is actually pretty big. But I would have to say my favorite story was my sophomore year. And this is kind of that transition, actually at the end of my sophomore year during the spring, and when I'm transitioning. And I guess it's not so much a story as it is, an understanding. So I was literally out the door. I called some teams. I called Oklahoma State, and I'm like, I'm headed back. And called home. And I'm thinking I'm just going to give them, hey, I'm coming home. I'm going to, and this is, like I said, long distance calls. It costs money.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So my dad answered, and I always wondered, I know it would have been different if my mom answered. She would have said, come on home. But my dad said, did you make that commitment? Did you sign that letter of intent? I was like, yes, sir. He's like, you need to figure it out. Click. And I'm sitting there like, okay, well, apparently I can't come home.
Made some calls. Wow.
Yeah, you better figure it out. So because I actually went back to talk to Coach Holtz about transitioning back to running back, because I just was done with the whole defensive deal.
Mm-hmm.
And basically my whole junior year, I didn't really play. I was back at running back, but I didn't play. But that was that year I saw things and I changed my perspective.
Okay.
In terms of, like I said, when my dad said, figure it out, I literally went back to my dorm room and it's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to leave. So what do I have to do to make it here? And I had to change my perspective in how I saw things and how I would react, and became a little more a part of the team as opposed to just kind of, just being out on the periphery.
Sure. Interesting. So when you were writing this book, I mean, were you at any point, I mean, what did you learn about yourself from writing this book? What did you learn about, like, hey, I didn't realize this, some situation affected me the way it did, kind of when you're kind of going through it, and, Heiss is kind of talking to you about certain situations. I mean, what did you learn from writing this book about yourself?
The thing I learned is that, was a lot more resilient than what I thought I was. And where I didn't feel I fit at Notre Dame, because culturally, socially, I'm just about to admit, it sucked.
Mm-hmm.
Being Notre Dame is not the social mecca of the world, so you're not going to have a lot of fun, at least at that particular time. But I learned that, to open up, also to be a little more open to sharing myself with others, and being a part of a team and a brotherhood that just, it means something. There's value in that. And I have value. I was not I did not think so highly of myself. And I talked about it, but coming to Notre Dame, I thought I was just a handout because of my brother, because he was number one player out of Oklahoma, and I'm just along for the ride. And I realized, again, writing the book, it's like, man, I did some pretty cool things.
Wow.
And I made a point of being more cognizant, or now I'm more cognizant of my value as a person, as a player, as a teammate, an employee, a father. So it really helped me establish who I am as the man I am today. It was those lessons I learned while at Notre Dame on those teams.
Wow, that's interesting. So it was almost kind of worth it just to kind of get the self-reflection for you to kind of learn more about who you are.
As I was going through and reflecting on the book and the chapters, I'm like, wow, that was pretty. Your eyes start to open up to things that you never knew. And like I said, that's what I said. Just making sure that if you have the opportunity to play at Notre Dame, value every minute of it, but more importantly, value the people that you encounter.
Right.
We were just back, I took my son, and the thing that jumped out to me was that he got to meet one of the founders of ESPN. And, you will just meet some of the most random people at Notre Dame.
Exactly.
And they cut across, different, ethnicities.
Everything,
they cut across genders, perspectives, eras. And you just, you never know. But again, that one common thread is the importance of, valuing, and like I said, what will you fight for, and what's important? What are those values and principles that you stand for? And those, come out in those relationships that you develop.
Sure. And it wasn't easy kind of prying you from Notre Dame, but you're now currently the executive director for Holtz's Heroes. Can you talk a little bit about how you made that transition, but more importantly, what Holtz Heroes are doing now.
Well, the transition kind of came because of an opportunity that my wife had to work in the city of Fort Worth as the chief equity officer and the director of diversity and inclusion.
Okay.
And the thing that she's always followed me throughout my career, and this is her time. At least in my mind, this is her time to shine.
Sure.
She was my tutor at Notre Dame, one of the smartest individuals I've ever met, my best friend, and she's always stood by me from the jump. And it's like I said, here's an opportunity to do something for her, right, and let her shine. And then I'm also still being able to do the things that I enjoy in terms of engaging the former athletes, in particular the guys that played under Coach Holtz, like yourself, and build that brand, build that camaraderie, that connectedness, and have the opportunity to provide scholarship opportunities and building community where our guys are doing different, supporting different charitable organizations that espouse the same values and principles of love, trust, and commitment that we hold dear as an organization, and living those principles and values out every day. And, and to see that, lived out through our families, through our jobs, and just our communities as a whole.
Well, I think it's also interesting. And I mean, I've had a chance to attend meetings and be on Zoom calls and stuff like that. The idea that, what we learned from this itty bitty, maybe a guy who weighs 150 soaking wet, that it spans over his career. His time. We just did an event in Virginia with some of the players from William and Mary, where he coached there. His legacy is huge, and for us to have a chance to be part of it, I think is great. So the idea that you're now kind of in control of this responsibility, I'm sure you feel a lot of pressure.
I'm excited. There's a level of pressure, but there's a lot more excitement because, the opportunities I had at Notre Dame, I was with Holtz Heroes. There's a lot more freedom, and I can kind of dictate kind of what that, assistance and where we go in, and the opportunity to make a difference. It's not as much, red tape and, a lot of legalese, because we can go in and say, hey, this is what's important. This is what we value, and actually boots on the ground, and make that difference. And doesn't have to go through a lot of red tape. And again, nothing against Notre Dame, but that was restricted because of the NCAA regulations, right, because of university regulations, that you have to kind of be cognizant. So to be able to do more with the opportunity to engage those individuals, and then just kind of build that community, and they still have that connectedness to Notre Dame, has been liberating in a lot of respects. But at the same time, yes, it's a daunting task. But if I didn't know that I had 350 guys that are willing to step on the mat and be there with me and for me, yeah, it'll be a lot more scary than what it is when guys, you can call somebody up no matter where you are and have someone that's going to step up and be there for you. It makes it that much easier, and it energizes me to get up every morning. And I just had the opportunity to have a conversation with Rod West. He's coming in for the college. He's on the committee for the college football playoff committee, and we're going to get together. But think about some of the guys that we have on the team that are doing great things, but at the end of the day, they're teammates, they're family people, and just okay. You were at USC, and we're at tailgating. Who rolls up with our squad? My son was there. Your daughter shows up. So that family, and I see that next generation taking the reins and making sure this legacy doesn't die.
That's amazing. For folks who want to get more information, please go to holtzeshero.org. It's going along with the ticker there on the bottom. Reggie, this has been awesome, man. As always, it's exciting. Your first book, you got to be over the moon. I wanted to get you on to talk about it because I think it's absolutely awesome. I didn't realize it was going to cover the literally generations of not only athletes but also kind of the behind the scenes. So I think that's terrific. Also, for the folks who are going to be in the South Bend area on November 5th, I will be signing autographs with Reggie, our dear friend Lisa Kelly, who finished her book. She's going to be on next week. I'm going to talk about her book. So this is the big 2 weeks for me. I get all these authors. Maybe I should get inspired, So we're actually going to be appearing at Augie's Locker Room in South Bend. That's 1811 South Bend Avenue in South Bend, Indiana. This will be Friday, November 5th from 1 to 3. If folks are interested, who may not have a chance to be there, you might be able to call and then they might be able to get some things signed for you. It's 574-277-6363. That's the number to Augie's Locker Room. I'd like to thank everyone listening and watching to this episode of the Zorich Podcast, Conversations with Leaders and Legends. This podcast, along with our other podcasts, will be on my YouTube page at youtube.com/ChrisZorich50, as well as on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you'll have a chance to kind of see more content, folks like our own Reggie Brooks. Also, check out the description below. We're going to have a link to Amazon for Reggie's first book. This is going to be first of many, I hope. If These Walls Could Talk, series from Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Reggie, this has been absolutely terrific. Now they can literally check another box, which is author. Do I have to call you something different? I can't call you my boy. I have to call you author. I'm not going to tell you how long it took me to get my personalized autographed copy of a book. We won't talk about that, but I am honored, and that's the book I read. The one behind me, I had to order from Amazon because I wasn't sure if I was going to get the book on time for Reggie. But that's a whole different story. So I am contributing to your success, Reggie. But no, seriously, man, thank you very much. This has been a blast.
Thanks for having me, man. As always, dude. From the last time I was on the show to now, man, this thing has been ratcheted up.
Man, I've evolved, man. I got little commercials. I got a little video for you to talk about. Say, man, give me another year. I might have another camera angle.
Full on. This is your book right here, just the podcast, man. I was like, the Tom Mendoza one was freaking awesome.
Oh yeah,
T. Rice. I'm like, man, I'm loving it, man. I love it. So I'm a subscriber of the Chris Zorich Podcast because you again, your perspective and just how you engage people and just your story alone is phenomenal. So anytime I can be of assistance to you, brother, please count me in. And I am all in on the Chris Zorich Podcast. I got to get on the 16. What's the
it's called the Super 16 post
Super
show
16.
Where we have a chance to rank the top 16 teams in college football. Again, thank you very, very much for that plug, Reggie. It's going to be on Monday on my YouTube channel at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. You the man, Reg?
Sweet, brother.
All right, well, thanks a lot, bro.
All right, bro. Have a good one.